Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Tiko Reynolds Hausman, and I am a committee member of the Women Cast Their Ballots Centennial Celebration with the Heritage Society and League of Women Voters, and it is my honor to be here this evening. I am joined with a fantastic panel of diverse women, and tonight's discussion will be about how women brought about the change to vote, as well as things that you can do today to stay engaged. Tonight's panel consists of MaryJane Mudd, president of Houston's League of Women Voters chapter, Robin Paoli, she is the president of the Houston Women's March, and Eesha Pandit, who is the co-founder of the Center for Advancing Innovative Policy. We also have Allison Bell, who is the executive director for the Heritage Society. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator this evening, Ms. Olga Rodriguez.
Thank you, Tiko. And again, thank you to the Houston Heritage Society for hosting this very timely conversation. So let's jump into it. So the first question I'd like to kick off this conversation with is, why did you all choose the roles that you currently have, whether they're volunteer, it's your career, but you obviously chose these leadership roles for a reason. So NJ, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of this evening. You know, I think my way of getting involved with political activity locally and beyond is a little newer. I did do a fair amount of lobbying on a personal level for my special needs daughter over the years and went to Capitol Hill and so forth. But when it comes to being the president of the League of Women Voters, you know, it was a few years ago when certain things had happened, you know, the elections had occurred and so forth. And I found myself just commenting on social media, talking to friends, but not really doing anything, not really making a difference. And I thought, why air my grievances somewhere when I can go out and I can do something that helps other people, that helps them to vote, that helps defend democracy. And that really is what the League is all about. It's about empowering voters and defending democracy. Please join the League. Next thing you know, a couple years later, I'm president.
Well, thank you for your service. Thank you. Eesha, tell us about you.
Sure. My very first exciting job was to do research at Amnesty International's Women's Human Rights Program. And so I started there, and I was very lucky. I had really great mentors who sort of said, you can do whatever social change you want to do. And fast forward many sort of jobs later, I was working on the Affordable Care Act. I was focused on making sure that women's voices, particularly women of color and immigrant women's voices, were informing that process. And I was a young activist at the time. I had just started this job working on this issue. And I felt as though what was happening in the world was people in Washington were saying, here's what you need to get those women out there to do. You need to tell them that this is what's possible. This is all we can get. This is everything that's possible in Washington. My job was to sort of translate that message from Washington into a field. And I felt like that was totally backwards. And the information should be going from the organizers and the people in the communities to Washington and not the other way around. And so at that time, I was young enough to think, well, maybe there's something about this that I don't get. And that's why this happens this way. And so, you know, I have a dear colleague of mine, we were working together at the time, and we were like, this isn't right. It feels upside down. And we said, well, maybe we don't get it. It turns out there was nothing we didn't get. It is upside down. And 10 years later, the two of us started the Center for Advancing Innovative Policy, which is all about changing that pipeline where information about what policy change we need starts at the grassroots and goes. So it's sort of a long journey to get to the point of feeling like the thing that we knew when we were young, sort of fired up people was actually right. And we shouldn't lose that spark, and we should stay with it. And so that's where we are now.
Thanks, Eesha. Tiko, how did you get involved, and why did you get involved with the League?
So I'll backtrack just a little bit because I know tonight we are talking about how everyone could participate. And I actually started my activism on the PTA at my kids' school. I joined the PTA. I became the legislative chair. Before you know it, I was on the board and advocating at the state for equity in schools as far as financing. And then I think I just caught the bug, and I was just so in awe of the process. And so fast forward, I've always been a supporter of the League of Women Voters. A friend said, hey, you should try out for the Rising Star program. And so it's actually a program that the League of Women Voters have where where you can apply, and it's nonpartisan, and you just learn how the process works and the parties and et cetera. And so from there, I just wanted to keep doing more, and applied and was accepted to be on the board. And so that's how I got there. And I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
We hope not. We hope not. So Robin, tell us about how you became engaged.
So generally speaking, it started at an early age, watching the civil rights movement in the news on TV as a child. And then my grandparents, this was in North Carolina, my grandparents were very involved, and in particular, connecting communities of faith. You know, it's been said that, I've forgotten if it's 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., but Sunday mornings is one of the most, segregated hours of the week in America. And so my grandparents were involved in helping to desegregate Sunday mornings. And that, along with watching things in the news as a child, really galvanized me as a young person. And I quickly determined that maybe my best role was in policy. And so I love learning more about what Eesha and her team are doing, because I was very much on the policy side of things. And then after so I did some work with campaigns, and I was to some degree vocal, but mostly I was on the policy side. And then after the 2016 election, I thought I've got to do both and. I can't just work on policy. I've got to take what I know and apply it to grassroots organizing and some other things. And realizing that in early January, realizing that there was not a local women's march for the Houston area. And I thought that not only seems wrong, like there's so much pent up demand for like people who would have progressive ideas about being involved as citizens. And it just seemed strategically wrong that there wasn't a march in Houston. And so I volunteered to start it. And we weren't sure if it was going to be one and done or if it would grow into a movement. And so we had 25,000 people come to that march in Houston. And it was, at that time, it was the largest march in downtown Houston, insofar as they've been taking records. And immediately afterwards, we held a big town hall at a beer garden, because it was the only place that was both large enough to take everybody and free. Mm-hmm. And so at this beer garden, we canvassed everybody that we could get a hold of who had marched with us, and to say, what do you want us to do next? And they said that they would like us to be a nonpartisan, nonprofit resource for voter education, issue education, and get out the vote. And while there's certainly some overlap with what the League of Women Voters does, and we love them, we work in partnership with them, like total respect for League of Women Voters, there's an additional element of taking to the streets or raising our voices in protest when there's something that we think has gone wrong, or when there's something we want to support. And that's pretty key to the identity of the march in Houston, mm-hmm. is that people were there because they care about their neighbors, yeah. because they care about education. Mm-hmm. It was really an act of how do I love my neighbors? It's to show up. Yeah. It's to show up and say, we're a city of immigrants. Yeah. We're accepting. We're open for for life and for business. And then one last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is that to marry briefly the ideas of policy and then grassroots activism, more and more we're seeing that the emerging waves of new voters are less motivated by party affiliation, and they're more motivated by policy issues. And so it'd be interesting to get everybody's feedback on that if you're seeing that as well, but that's what we're seeing. And so that's another reason why we've stayed nonpartisan, and we invite everybody across the political spectrum to be involved. Certainly we're progressive and we're women, and but we don't single out candidates to support, and we don't single out a party to support.
Right. Thank you, Robin, for those comments. And you mentioned the Women's March, which obviously was a very important event, an historical one here in Houston. And so with that being said, and Tiko, I'm going to direct this question first to you, and we'll have the other panelists talk about it. But from your seat, from your perch, how do you see how women have been involved in politics, and how has that changed? Even 5, 10, 15, 100 years ago, we didn't have the right to vote. But how are you seeing how women engage in politics? What's changing? What are you witnessing?
I think what I'm witnessing definitely is a little bit more independence as far as issues. One of the things that struck me, or that strikes me sometimes, is just how our politics just align with some traditions and family beliefs. And it seems now that many women are I'm trying to find the words, dissenting from the patriarchy, for lack of a better word, if I could say that. And so they're finding their own voices in their families, where normally they're just the peacemakers. We're finding our voice. And for me personally, I love seeing more activism in young adults. And I have to agree with what Robin said. They tend to be policy driven, not so much as party. And I see that even in my own daughter, who is 16. And so she's watching, and of course, she, follows with what we say, but what really motivates her are social justice issues. And so whatever side you're on, as far as she's concerned, that's whose side she follows. And so I'm seeing the awakening of many women who have just kind of been status quo and just can no longer sit by and watch some of the injustices and some of the things that we're witnessing today.
Very true. Thank you for your comments. So, Eesha, from your perspective, what's happened historically, and what are we witnessing now with women in politics and becoming civically engaged? Things that pertain to public policy, especially.
Well, one of the things that's so interesting is that even if you had asked this question 6 years ago, I don't think that you would have heard people say young people are really interested in policy.
Yeah.
I think this is emergent. So there's something really important there. Part of that is seeing role models, like we had more women run for office. And we also have had, one of the things I think is really important to lift as like a moment that has raised all of our consciousness is the movement for Black lives over the past, 6 to 10 years, where like the entire conversation in our country about justice and inequality has been shaped by that movement, has been shaped by people seeing protests in the street. And, there's some work I do in Houston with a South Asian youth group that's specific, and that group of young people, they're all entering college or just about to enter college or in college. They don't know a time where Black Lives Matter wasn't in the news. And so that movement has really shaped what they think is possible. It has shaped my work around public policy. I do work on reproductive justice and gender-based violence and criminal legal system reform. All that stuff is work I've been doing for 2 decades. And in the past years, I see a totally different consciousness around what that is. So to the point that Robin was making earlier about how this collaboration between the way that social justice efforts, when people are in the streets talking about things, being really loud and vocal and refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice, that shapes what policy is possible. It shapes the way people think of what we understand. I mean, we hear the word intersectionality more now than ever. You know, people are paying attention to the ways identities shape politics, and that all politics is in fact identity politics. Right. And we're sort of learning this collectively. And I mean, in my mind, that movement, the movement for Black lives, anchored in Black feminism, is like a cornerstone of what makes everything else possible. It engages all kinds of other issues, and it has shaped, I think, an entire generation of young people who would then now be more likely to say, well, what is your stance on racial justice? You know, like that kind of conversation was not happening before the conversation showed up in the streets. So I am such a firm believer that that's where power starts, is in the grassroots, and that if we pay attention to what's happening there, we can build a lot of momentum in policy.
Great. So MJ, from the League of Women Voters perspective, and just, you know, what you've been witnessing, what has changed in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years with women being involved in politics? What have you witnessed?
Well, you know, I'm surrounded by people who have been doing this work for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and I've been with the League only a few. But, you know, to step back for just a moment, I keep nodding my head because I've got a few daughters. We have the 28-year-old who has some disabilities, and then my 23-year-old and 21-year-old. When George Floyd was murdered, the first thing they wanted to do was go to the Black Lives Matter march downtown, and we all ended up standing on the Woodhead Bridge over 59 and holding signs. It was kind of our way to, you know, we were concerned about COVID and all that. But, you know, when I was younger, that just wouldn't be happening. And it was, to them, it just wasn't even a discussion. It wasn't even a thought process. They believed so strongly that this is what they needed to do. And I agree. So I don't want to repeat everything that Robin and Eesha are saying, but there's just no question that these are specific issues that wouldn't have been discussed even 6 years ago. Racial justice, social justice, you know, I mean, social justice, please, but it's now become a part of the conversation. And identity politics, I mean, it has gotten to the point where, you know, who you're voting for kind of represents, although that's because of the issues. So getting back to the League is nonpartisan, absolutely is, but the League will make a statement when it sees something that is considered to be wrong. If voters are disenfranchised, if people are disenfranchised, if there is an issue around the ability to vote. But there were statements that came out with the murder of George Floyd, and that we are anti-racist, and how you can be anti-racist, because the League is about educating. And people of all backgrounds come to our website and, you know, into our organization. They may have no experience, they may have a lot. So those statements have been made, and, you know, I'm proud to be a part of it, because the more I get involved, the more I learn.
Yep.
And Olga, if I could make one more point, I just want to re-emphasize something we glanced over that Eesha brought up, and that is the record number of women who are now running for office. I don't have the stats on it, but, you know, we're seeing that, and that is a good thing, because, you know, I think that's what's been missing is some feminine leadership, you know, the compassion and the empathy to create some of the policies that we need to take care of our communities.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just very quickly on that note, I think, you know, the US population, it's what, 52%, 53% female, I guess. Yeah. But in elected office, I think we're what, maybe 10, 12% presented in elected office across the board. It's, Eesha might know, I don't know, but that number.
It's low. It's depending on when you cut the slice, it's like somewhere between 9 and 12%.
9 and 12%, yeah, if you think about it. And we're 52% of the US population. So That's why we're here today.
Yes.
So, Robin, so what do you
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'd like to pick up just directly on what Tiko said about how many women are running for office, how many women are being elected. And, you know, so we've had certainly Texas women elected to office, whether it was Barbara Jordan or Ann Richards, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, but they've been the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
And that's how it's been nationwide. And one of the differences I see coming out of, and I really peg the 2017 women's marches as a moment in time when you can measure before and after on some things about citizen involvement, about women running for office and things like that. So while certainly there are other times in our history when we've seen a surge in the conversation about equality, whether it's around that it's not just white men, it's black men or brown men, or it's women too, or it's not just white women, it's black women, you know, Latina, Asian, Indian, indigenous, it's all women. And it's not just a binary gender base either. And so, but previously, every time there was a step forward, there were some steps backwards. And the 70s is a really good example of, there were some big movements in the 70s for women's rights. And then there was a big backlash. And so while there were some one-off women who became very notable in their fields, boy, everybody's still hitting the glass ceiling. And the paycheck divide we see today. Right. Women don't make as much as men. And then within women, I think it's Asian, white, black, Latina, indigenous. I think, and so I hold that up very gently. If somebody has better stats, correct me on that. But that was the last chart I saw. And that's still a holdover from that, and that pushback. And one of the differences I see is that when the women's marches hit in January, men were there too, and families. And so one of the biggest things at the Houston March were multi-generational families, where grandparents, and in fact, we a couple of folks sent in pictures, you know, like posted selfies, 4 generations with the youngest one in a stroller. And, you know, there were women in their 50s, 60s, 70s who said, wait a minute, haven't we already done this? There were, you know, young college educated women who said, what? I can't believe this is still a conversation. And then there were all the men who were there to say, you know, my friend, my wife, my partner, my daughter, my mother, whoever it is, my grandchild, my neighbor matters. And for all that tonight's conversation is about women raising their voices and women being heard and women being engaged in the system and in the cycle, I think a game changer for us is who our allies are. And that there are more men, and that women are being much more intentional about being intersectional. That it's not one demographic that's going to make the difference. It's all of us together. We're not going anywhere without each other.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to start with you on this next question. It's about the word power, and whether it's political power or just however you define that. But I think the way a man defines power and the way a woman defines power might be a little different. And also, I think at times, I know when I was younger, I thought power was a negative word. It was not something I was comfortable with. But why do you think women are becoming much more comfortable with acquiring power? And as I've been told, you said no one gives you power; you have to take it. So, what are your thoughts on that, Tiko?
So I definitely agree with the characterization of, power being this manly, macho, aggressive, kind of thing. But I've gone personally to define power as influence, which has helped me maneuver. And so I use them, I guess, interchangeably, but, it really comes down to influence, and that is your ability to get people to hear you out, to have an exchange, and hopefully have a conversation. I had I know we're all running from Facebook because it's very controversial and everybody has something to say. And I have a younger friend who has been posting about don't vote, the election, electoral college, and just all of these things that you hear some of the young people say. And I just had to pause. So I was like, how do I influence this fella, to say something different? And so my end was just to remind him that while, federal elections are a small percentage, we have local elections. And so they aren't dominated by the electoral college. And in fact, we had a super candidate who lost a runoff by under 20 votes. And so having that conversation, and it dawned on me, the real essence was people not feeling like their voice matters. And so for me, a conversation starter with a lot of the younger generations who are, just disgusted with the level is to remind them about our local politics and how their voices can matter, and they do matter. And those things affect us just about as much, if anything, than what you're witnessing. So a little bit of a redirect, if you will.
So Robin, are women obviously becoming more comfortable with power?
Yes, and in part, I think they're redefining how they, just what Tiko said, they're redefining how it's wielded, how it's obtained, what it looks like. And so, historically, people have talked about women having soft power and men having hard power. And so when you think about, if you want an influencer in Latinx or Hispanic communities, it's often an abuela. And so Eesha, correct me on that if I'm wrong on that, but it's often a woman in the household who will make a decision about healthcare, making a decision about nutrition or something like that. In healthcare, people generally trust nurses more than they do doctors. And within nursing, it's almost always nurses of color. And so I saw one survey where people basically said, I do what if a Black nurse walks in and says, you need to take your medicine, people take it. And then you see the reversal. And as you get away from a nurse to a doctor or somebody else, it's like, well, now, why do they want me to do it? And so there's still an aggregation of soft power and influence, but we've got to have hard power to make what people call hard power to make the legislative changes that we need and the changes in corporate structures and things like that. And I think that the work that Eesha is doing, grassroots up, that MJ is doing with the League about involving people at the individual level of what it looks like, the work that Tiko's doing, that we're seeing, I think, a new generation of citizen empowerment, where people increasingly understand what they can do to move the needle towards the goal that they want. And even when they aren't quite sure, they know they want to. And so there's this higher articulation of, how can I make a difference? What can I do? And I think we're seeing more and more women and more young women getting involved from that perspective.
Thanks. So MJ, with the League of Women Voters, do these conversations happen? You guys talk about power and then the result, power, influence, encouraging people to register to vote?
Okay, did you say register to vote?
Yeah. For power.
This year has been a strange year because of the inability to gather like we would like. But we absolutely, we have a study and advocacy group that is part of our board in which we bring in volunteers who are passionate. Everybody's passionate, but beyond passion, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about wanting to have fair maps? What will we do about fair elections? And so we are, you know, we've gotten past, we're making Zoom work, you know, we've got our committees, we have these conversations, and we talk about how we can go to Austin, what we can do, how can we testify, how can we make these opinions go from here to there and really influence change. And so that is, it definitely happens, and it happens across the board. Also, and I've alluded to this a couple times, anytime we see a hit against democracy, and it can be something, well, again, fair maps, it can be a number of different issues. You could see on the US website, there are like 50, but something as simple as, and Tiko knows about this, just trying to, and it's nonpartisan, just trying to put registration boxes in post offices around the city, just little blue, red, white, and blue boxes with little registration forms inside, something that had been done in the past, but now we were getting pushback. And so at first we're like, well, maybe it's just a couple, you know, ends up being, you know, 20, 30 post offices that won't let us do this. Now it seems simple and it seems like it's not a big deal, but when you think in certain cultures and just where people go, where in some communities, the post office is what they trust. And so we fortunately received some support from a couple of local legislators. We took it to the media so that they could follow up on the story. And then eventually the United States Post Office worked with us and said, hey, you've got to be able to put those boxes out at the post offices. They put an email out to everybody. And so in the end, we could do it. You know, it's just a box, registration forms, you know, but it matters. It matters. And so things like that, you know, and it was, you should have seen the emails and the calls and everybody getting, it was kind of, I want to say it was exciting. I was disappointed to see that we had to do it, but there was energy behind it. You know, I was raised to be friendly, to be nice, and Tiko sees on my Facebook page, and plus I represent the league. So I'm nonpartisan. I want to get along with everybody, but sometimes you got to draw a line in the sand. And I'm, like I said, I'm surrounded by people with tremendous I'm coming to the party a little late, but by God, you know, even now I can have that voice, and I'm teaching my daughters and others.
Well, MJ, what you did, the story you just told about what the League of Women Voters did, you guys exercise influence and power, I think. And that was, whether someone may not interpret it that way, that's exactly what you did. You used, you know, the League of Women Voters, you used the media, you became an influencer. And I think that's a great example of how an organization, an individual can exercise.
Question about power, because I think it gives so many opportunities. Before I answer it, I want to share those stats. So in 2012, there were 16% women in Congress, but in 2020, there are 26% women in Congress. Woohoo! So if we think about, you know, we think about change over hundreds of years and blah, blah, but also people can be mobilized relatively quickly to make, that's still a small number, right? So, but I just wanted to correct the facts so that, but also so that people could see that in this period, there is this uptick that we're on, and that's important. A really, it's kind of like a portal into thinking about what we're out here doing. I think of power as having power means you can choose your own destiny. That's what it means to be powerful, right? That you are not constrained by other people's visions of you, by their prejudices, somewhat surprised, though not completely surprised, in, you know, a few weeks into right after the 2016 election, when I saw how many white women voted for Donald Trump. Right? So like, that's something that we saw happen, right? So what that tells us is that there's an alignment with power happening there that we may want to intervene in, depending on what our interests are and our calculations of success and justice, right? So I think the power question like opens up so much for us. The last thing I'll say about that is, if we model ourselves on, as women, our sense of power on the way men have wielded power against us, or more broadly, then we're setting ourselves to replicate some of those very harmful dynamics. And I feel part of our job is to really intervene in the idea of what power is and recreate, as you all have said, redefine what it means of others. That in fact means something else. But we have to define it. So it's actually, you know, they feel like they can't be soft, they can't do X, Y, Z because they're modeling their sense of power on what they've seen white men do. And they feel as though that's legitimate. And so our job is to not say we can be that too. It is in fact to say, we're going to blow this entire notion apart and we're going to define it for ourselves, and it looks like something else. That's the harder path to follow, but here we are, we're on it.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. I think that's a great perspective about power and how women perceive power. You're right, because I think we define it differently, especially, for example, if you have an elected woman in Congress, you know, what are her, you know, likely issues? I mean, healthcare, you know, childcare, education. I'm not saying that economics and unemployment are not her issues, but still, it's, you know, because of our experiences, I think in the roles that we play, that's the power we want to bring. The power. So, those of you who are online, I believe, can they send a question in? Or we're gonna, Lisa? I can't hear you.
Unfortunately, our executive director keeps getting knocked off, losing the capability to control the chat room. But if everybody just wants to go ahead and unmute themselves right now while she's trying to get connected again, that would be great. And then we'll take turns just asking questions. I'll start off by asking, you know, what if you're a woman and you're under 18, you know, you can't vote yet, or you're a non-citizen. I don't like the fact that activism has become a dirty word, when to me it's bringing, you know, policies and, you know, the injustice to the forefront. So what can we do if, again, we're not of age yet, or we're not citizens? How do we go about making change?
I guess I can take that or start with it. Certainly, if you aren't of age, you know, and you're interested, you can always volunteer for a campaign. It doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a party. It could be for a social justice organization, but they always need help and support. And interestingly enough, this year, in this election, the Harris County clerk opened up a lot of opportunity for student workers. And so those students are being paid to help support the election, mostly in IT, because there's a lot of new innovative technology, and they get a letter of recommendation from the clerk. And I think I would say to those who maybe aren't citizens, we forget the little things like
Citizens yet, right? Because all citizens could vote, but yet we could not. And so we had these married women's association that became kind of the stepping stone to activism of women beginning together to make these social changes. So thank you for reminding me of that.
And that definitely, you know, I think is a perception that folks may even have of the League, and potentially they were women, but they fought for social justice and they used their power and influence of the time to be able to open the eyes and change minds and help, you know, just community activism.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions from our other viewers?
Yes, this is Ray, and I have a question. And we've been throwing around the word loosely of citizenship, which is fundamental, but the definition of that has always defined who had power, which has been a big part of this discussion. And I would like to ask the panelists, through your work and efforts and who you've met, if your own idea has evolved or changed about your concept of what it is to be a citizen. Now, it sounds like a simple question, but it really, and Lisa's smiling because I know she and I have had this discussion, that when you start to scratch it and look at it deeper, you find the idea of that citizenship, and that's even part of what's happening through the census right now, with excluding people who pay taxes, contribute to our society, but if they're not defined as a citizen, they even lose the ability of their communities that have to support them, and they support their communities. So I guess, has it changed your own idea of what you are in your place in America?
Ray, thanks for that question. I'll jump in first and try and be brief. I think it has sharpened my sense. It's sharpened my pre-existing sense that there need to be better pathways to citizenship in America. We do a lot of work raising the voices of folks who are here under DACA, folks who are immigrants and not yet citizens, and there need to be better ways, easier ways. And when I say easier, what I mean is that a more just and equitable, clearly defined, articulated, this is how you can come to our country. And for everybody who's already here, there should clearly be a bridge to citizenship for everybody who's already here. And there are time constraints, so I won't go into the nuance of all of the sort of straw man questions that people throw out there, but that basically we should do more to have more citizens. And then the corollary to that is that there are plenty of people who are natural born citizens and can trace their families back generations who don't actually exercise the rights and privileges and responsibilities of citizenship. And that's frustrating. People for whom they take it for granted or take it as a part of privilege and don't do the things that would actually help our society and put their citizen to use, like paying attention to candidates and really researching them rather than just voting for them because you saw them on TV or something. And I'll stop there.
I jump
Yeah,
in. Oh, go.
I'm just thinking excuse me, am I talking over?
No, go ahead, MaryJane.
No, just to agree. I have every time you talk, Robin, I have like 25 different thoughts that come to my mind. But researching, you know, the voter's guide that, and I'm not promoting the League at this moment, but we do create this voter's guide that provides nonpartisan information on all the candidates. And, you know, it's interesting. We just had a couple we just had a whole bunch of them published, and I was trying to hand some out, and people are just so excited to get it. But then some other individuals that are in extended family and so forth, like, oh, I know, I'm just going to go straight down the ticket, or I'm just going to, well, I'm not even interested because there are no propositions. And just, you know, read it, really learn, really learn. I know we all have opinions and we all feel certain ways, but you know, when you get to your county commissioners and you get to your county clerk and different, you know, just read who's running and how they've taken the time and how they, you know, they really care about citizenship. And the other thing was, and this is very, you know, kind of pie in the sky, or kind of, what word am I looking for? It's just my way of looking at things, rose-colored glasses. But I tell you, last year I got to go to a few of the ceremonies, the naturalization ceremonies, because the league does register voters at those. And I had not been to them before, you guys. So maybe for all of you, this is just another day. But I went into M.O. Campbell Education Center, and there'd be 2,500 people, and they've got their hands over their hearts, and they're taking their oath, and they are so excited because they waited so long to be in that seat, in that position. There are tears, you know, and there's everybody under the sun in different ages. There was a 102-year-old woman who became a citizen last year and registered to vote. I mean, I'm trying not to cry.
Yeah.
So when you see that, and then you see, I don't know if I'm going to vote this year, or I don't really need that voter's guide. And I just, you know, I'm glad that Tiko was restrained, and that's how I am too. You know, you can't influence people if you come right at them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just amazing what it is to be an American, and the differentiation amongst Americans.
Yeah.
Let me ask this. We actually have Betty Chapman on here, and it was through Betty Chapman's lecture that I learned how women banded together, again, in the early 1900s for these small associations on the community level, and the wonderful things, how when they worked together, the accomplishments that they made for the city of Houston. Betty, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and I unmuted myself.
Can you add to that? Can you tell us that wonderful information, part of your lecture, about how, you know, the park systems, you know, even just kind of, you know, cleaning up the streets from garbage and things like that, that all of these women cared so much about their communities. And we started kind of in these baby steps to show that we can contribute to, you know, our community and our city, and therefore make these big changes.
I gave the lecture again. Can anybody hear me? I
Yes,
just have a webcam. I don't have a good mic on my computer. I did the lecture again today for another group, and I used that very thing. The thing that amazed, every time I make this lecture, what amazes them is that they realize, my goodness, how could I not go out and vote? You know, why would every woman not go out and vote if she knew the story of how hard it was for the women to get the vote? So I always talk about that, and I say that is how you show your gratitude to these women from years ago, is if you never miss an election, never miss one. And I think that is important. The other thing, I have two things. I want to thank you all. Ann and I, back in January, February, when we dreamed up the exhibit, we were thinking about a session just exactly like you all are doing right now. And I do want to thank you so much for coming and doing this. I had several things in my mind I was going to say. This is something that really doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's personal. My husband was the naturalization attorney here for 25 years. So I knew all along what it meant. I mean, he loved naturalizing these people. It's been some years. He would be very unhappy right now. And he has passed away. But it was so thrilling to him to see these women, these people from all over the world to come in and feel like they were becoming a citizen of the best country in the world. And it just thrilled him. And at that time, all of the naturalization ceremonies were done in courtrooms, and they were small and very personal, which was really great. And my girls loved to go to them. They thought it was just really great to go and see all these people from all over the world who were becoming citizens. And we just need to get the story out there about how important every vote is. Is anything taught on citizenship in the schools? I seem to remember when I was in 9th grade, we had a course, and what was it called? It wasn't political
Civics.
science, really.
They used to teach
The government-
civics.
Okay, it was civics. It was
Mhm.
civics, and the coach taught it, but that was okay. It was, but we did have a lot of civics, and it made me very aware. And I lived in the deep South, and so of course I grew up at a time women really were, just not much room for you to decide what you wanted to do when you grew up. So I've talked enough, but I did want to thank you. And I just did wonder if citizenship is taught anywhere in the schools. Anybody know?
I missed what was the question?
Is citizenship
If
taught in school?
citizenship is taught, in a middle school or whenever you think it would do, and is it included in any kind of coursework? You get history and you can get the story of all of this in history, but that doesn't have an impact on you when you're learning what your responsibilities as a citizen are and how you really can, act. You really can act and become a good citizen. So I just was curious. My girls are long since grown, and I lived with my granddaughters, so I just didn't know whether anything like that was taught or not. Okay, I'm through.
Well, Olga, I was wondering, it seems like everybody, all the panelists represent a different part of the cycle of participation. And I wondered, before we go, if we could talk for just a moment about that it's not just one thing, it's all of it.
We would love that. Olga actually just got dropped off due to technical issues, but I love that. So why don't we go ahead and start. I'm just going in the order that I see on my panel. MaryJane, if you want to start, Eesha, and then Robin, if you'll round us up on that, on the cycle.
So I want to make sure I understand. So just how each of us, we represent different parts of the cycle of activism, right?
Right. And so just to clarify on that, there's Eesha would represent policy. Tiko would represent a variety of things, but if Tiko, if you don't mind speaking briefly to the candidate or like volunteering for candidates or running for office, Eesha could do policy and the grassroots policy. MJ, you could do voting, and then I could come in, I could bat last in that order and come wrap up with activism.
Okay, can you repeat the initial question? Sorry.
Yes, just we represent a cycle of involvement.
Yeah.
That it only works when actually we do all of it. So it's not just that we go outside and hold up a sign and say, I support immigrants, or it's not just that we fill out a survey that says I'd like to have more schools in my neighborhood. That there's this whole part of it, which includes candidates, supporting candidates, learning about candidates.
Yeah, so that's super important, because again, I think what we see time and time again is it becomes more of a popularity contest versus, issues. And, full disclosure, I actually ran for office. And so there were a lot of lessons from that. And one of the really, really unfortunate things is just how challenging it is as a female, and particularly an African-American candidate, to I say to be taken serious, or people to understand that the only way that we make these type of changes is to put money and time behind those candidates. Because it was amazing how many times people would say, did you run? Did you really want to win? I'm like, of course I wanted to win. Why wouldn't I do that? Why would I not? And then again, and I harp on this because I think, we just have to, as they say, as Eesha says, take your power, because, it was who do you think you are? You're not in line. You know, where did you come from? Kind of a situation. But it's like, I'm a citizen. I have every right as everyone else, and I don't feel like I have to pay these arbitrary dues in order to serve. And so that was very interesting. And then finally, I've just always felt passionately about political activism, like I said, on the levels where we all can show up. We can all show up to a civic association meeting. We could all show up to a PTA meeting. And so seeing democracy work on a local level is what really inspired me, and what makes me feel that anything is possible, because I've seen the possibilities of what true activism and us standing up and having a voice can do. I might have went off script, but
there's no getting off script here. It's relevant.
Eesha, do you want to respond?
Sure. I'm so moved by that. I think it makes me just like want to run out again. I was so tired when we started this call. I'm like, I'm ready to go again. Okay, so I think the what you said about not wanting to pay your dues, I think that's like a radical, beautiful, subversive thing, right? Because that idea that you have to pay your dues, you have to do a certain amount of things, you have to fit a particular mold in order to have power is like exactly it's not just the practical things that keep us out of these places, but it's like we all of the talk that I hear from brilliant women I know who talk about having imposter syndrome, it's rooted in that, it's rooted in that. So one of the things that I think is most transgressive is to, when we're self-editing ourselves, to build networks of people who are like, well, of course you can do that, girl. You already know how to do it. Here are 15 things you've done. Why wouldn't you do it? Totally. And to sort of do that for each other and to support each other through those things. I think that's very powerful. And that's part of, I didn't consider myself someone, and even now when I sort of show up to spaces and they're like, oh, who's the policy expert in the room? That they don't always think that that's me, in the space. They're looking for like a dude with a tie, that's the thing. So, but we don't believe in paying our dues. We think we show up where we want to show up. We learn on the job the way men have learned to learn on the job, that's part of this journey, and that's part of and supporting each other through it. But if I could just say one thing about the citizenship question, which I thought was so beautiful, and because it's part of what shapes my sense of why I'm civically engaged as an immigrant myself and the daughter of immigrants, that the idea in this moment, we're living through so much demographic anxiety. People feel as though the country is changing in a way around race, with gender identity, all this stuff. And what that means is there's more anxiety. When people are afraid, they leverage that outwards. And so if we say that the people who have the most rights in our society are people who we deem citizens, then it's our responsibility to make that available to everyone. Otherwise, you're engaging in a human rights violation, right? If the only way you get rights is by being a citizen, and it's not open to everybody here, I think a lot about refugees. I think a lot about people who are being denied citizenship. If your rights are protected by virtue of having a national identity and you're not allowed to have that identity, then who's there protecting your rights? So I think this is like a fundamental human question of, if we're defining citizenship as the way that we are meaningful members of a society, then we can't morally hold that back from anyone.
Oh my God, that was brilliant. Sorry. Go ahead. MaryJane?
Was I supposed to talk about voting? I'm just so overwhelmed by what Eesha just said. I'm like, okay, where am I?
MJ, early vote, MJ.
I'm going before me, I don't know.
Early voting's on.
All right, okay. Well, if my component is voting, first of all, I just want to say I agree with everything my panelists are saying, and I'm just so overwhelmed by it. The voting, okay. No kidding, please vote. Everybody knows that, everybody says that. When you dig a little bit deeper and you see the division that's in this country, and some people just get so frustrated. I know Tiko said this earlier, well, why bother? Why bother? you need to bother. You need to understand what it means. You need to understand it. You need to bother. And yes, I gave and Tiko and I have done this together too, a presentation on the 19th Amendment, and, just being reminded again of what it took for those women. And looking at photographs of Susan B. Anthony thrown to the ground because she was trying to vote. And of course, I don't understand personally, but what people of color went through, they're not even having the rights really until the mid-60s, and then still struggling. Just, it saddens me that some people forget about that. Clearly not everybody, and everyone here is influencing that. When we speak about voting as well, I'm deeply concerned about voter suppression. I think a lot of people are. I'm learning is not, again, I was raised to be friendly, and I want to get along with everyone. And I have some friends who don't think that there's really voter suppression, but I've been able to stand up and really explain why I believe this. And of course, the league does as well. But I'm talking about that individual influence. And it is happening. It's real. It's happening all over the country. It's especially happening in Texas. And we just have to do the best we can. So there's the voting, but there's also trying to help other people vote, empowering other people, informing other people. And when you see something wrong happening, standing up for it. As far as the basics about how and when and who, yes, please go to the League of Women Voters website for information on how you can get your poll, but also Harris County, harrisvotes.com, make a plan and get there. Don't let anybody keep you from getting there.
Robin, you put the question out there, so why don't you wrap us up with your answer to the cycle of how everybody participates and how your organization and what you believe is important to the cycle.
Okay, thanks. At the beginning of our conversation tonight, I mentioned that back in 2017, we had a huge town hall after that first march. And there was somebody and we were passing a microphone around more than 1,000 people and at the town hall. And one of them said, "We just all marched. 6 million of us marched. Why is it still the same? Why is today still the same as yesterday? Why haven't we seen a huge change after 6 million of us marched?" And the crowd sort of roared its support. And although intellectually we know why things haven't changed, there's that feeling of, I did my thing. I stood up and said, this is wrong. But there's no one thing in all of this. Voting is a superpower. We should all vote, but we should educate ourselves about our vote so that we don't vote for somebody we later regret voting for. We should educate ourselves so that we have the best possible chance of having the best folks. But for everybody who's been speaking tonight, we represent a different part of a whole. And so it's like we're pieces of the puzzle. So for what Tiko was saying about, yes, she was going to run for office. That's beautiful. And we need more women who will stand up and say, yes, this is something I care about. I'm going to run for office. And we need more women and men and high school students and middle school students who will say, I'm going to find a way to support a candidate. I'm not going to let good be the enemy of, I'm not going to let great be the enemy of good. I'm going to find a candidate that I can support, and I'm going to support them in some way. To Eesha's point about grassroots policy, I'm not going to just vote, or I'm not going to just find a candidate that I can support. I'm going to find a way to support an issue and get involved. And when you think about Moms Demand, the gun sense group, that's a beautiful, illustration of that. But then sometimes we need to go outside in large numbers and gather together and say, we love our neighbors. We support immigrants. We love folks who are LGBTQIA. We support everybody being at the table. Or come out in large numbers and say, what just happened was wrong, and what we're saying, and we demand justice for something, that all of this works together. And that when we join these different strands together, we've got something that builds a better America. And it's something that each person can do. Each person can find their way in to what we're doing.
Great.
Bravo.
Thank you, everyone. This is Allison. I feel like probably we could probably talk for 30 more minutes about this topic, but I know people have lives and we our time is almost up. I really appreciate you all the wonderful our wonderful moderator, of course, and then all the wonderful panelists. You just fascinate me with how, I mean, you all are so involved, and I really am learning so much from each of you. And you're right, I could listen to Eesha talk about her passion for hours. So we're so excited that you all joined us. I just wanted to remind you, we have an event on October 23rd. As Lisa mentioned, that is an important day in this suffrage movement. I hope you'll join us. It's at City Hall at 5:30. We can make sure that all of you all have the information, and it's on our website. It will be on our website. We'll read a proclamation, and then we'll walk down the street and come over to the Heritage Society, and I hope you can join us, because I wish you could see the beautiful exhibit if you haven't yet. I mean, it's just so festive and fun in here in the museum. I just love looking at it every day. Anne and Betty did an amazing job, and I've learned so much from them as well. So I hope you can join us. And is there anything else that anyone wants to add?
It's been an honor to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Likewise.
Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for coordinating, and Tiko for organizing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.